Elias had not planned to stop at the market. He was only cutting through the narrow streets to avoid traffic, moving on habit rather than intention, when the stall caught his attention. It wasn't bright. It wasn't loud. It didn't call to him the way the others did. It sat back in the shade, half hidden, with a table of objects that looked forgotten rather than for sale. The man behind the table didn't speak. He didn't gesture. He simply watched, not with expectation, but with the kind of patience that suggested he already knew the outcome. Elias reached for the book before he realized he had decided to. It was heavier than it looked, bound in dark leather worn smooth at the edges, as if handled often but never carelessly. No title. No author. No markings on the cover at all. When his fingers touched it, something shifted. Not a shock. Not a vision. Just a quiet sense of attention being returned, as if the book had noticed him noticing it. "You won't understand it by reading," the man said at last, his voice calm, almost absent. "Only by noticing what happens when you stop trying to." Elias almost laughed. He had heard lines like that before, usually followed by a pitch or a price. But the man didn't name a number. He didn't even look at the book. "How much?" Elias asked. The man shrugged. "You'll leave something behind either way." Elias placed a few bills on the table, unsure why he did so, then walked away with the book tucked under his arm. He didn't look back. That night, he sat at his desk with the book open in front of him. The pages were filled with symbols and fragments of text written in a language he didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar. Not readable. Recognizable. Like a melody remembered without the notes that he tried to focus. He leaned in. He squinted. Nothing happened. Hours passed. Frustration crept in. The symbols blurred into patterns, then into noise. Finally, tired and mildly annoyed with himself, Elias leaned back in his chair and let his eyes rest on the page without effort. That was when it happened. Not words. Not images. A sensation. A subtle tightening behind the eyes, followed by a release. The room seemed to soften around the edges, as if the sharpness of things had been turned down slightly. The book felt warmer under his hands, not physically, but attentively. Elias closed it. The moment passed that he opened it again and tried to recreate the feeling by concentrating harder. Nothing that he tried again. Still nothing that it wasn't responding to effort. That much was clear. Over the next few days, Elias noticed small changes. He felt less compelled to fill silence. He found himself pausing before speaking, not to choose better words, but because something inside him had already finished the sentence before it formed. One evening, while walking home after sunset, he passed the same market street. Most of the stalls were gone. The man with the quiet table was still there. "You opened it," the man said, without looking up. "I don't know what I opened," Elias replied. "It doesn't do anything." The man smiled faintly. "Good." Elias frowned. "Good? If it did something, you'd chase it," the man said. "Then it would close." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the street drifting around them. Finally, Elias asked, "What is it?" "A mirror," the man said. "Not for the face." Elias hesitated. "And the things that try to stop it?" The man's eyes lifted then, just slightly. You've already noticed them. That night, Elias paid attention to what changed when the house grew quiet. Not by trying to meditate. Not by following instructions. He simply noticed the space between thoughts when he didn't rush to fill it. There it was again. The same subtle signal. The same inward pressure, followed by a calm that didn't feel emotional. It didn't make him happy. It made him clear, but with it came something else, that a tightening in his chest. A whisper of unease. A sudden urge to check his phone. To distract himself. To do anything but remain still. The book lay closed beside him, untouched. Elias realized then that whatever the codex responded to, something else reacted to it as well. Not aggressively. Not violently. Just persistently. Like static introduced to drown out a signal. That he remembered the man's words. You'll leave something behind either way. That night, Elias didn't try to understand. He didn't read. He didn't ask questions. That he simply noticed what remained when effort disappeared, and for the first time in a long while, the quiet did not feel empty. Elias did not return to the market for several days. Not because he didn't want to, but because something in him sensed that returning too quickly would turn the experience into a pursuit. And pursuit, he was beginning to learn, collapsed whatever fragile clarity had begun to form. Instead, the nights became his classroom. It always happened the same way. The house would settle. Sounds would thin out. The edges of thought would loosen. And just before sleep pulled him under, the signal would appear, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the unmistakable presence of something that did not belong to imagination. It wasn't comforting. It wasn't alarming. It simply was. Then came the interference. A memory would surface for no reason. An unfinished task would demand attention. A sudden wave of guilt would press in, something from years ago, something already resolved, yet emotionally intact. The timing was too precise to ignore. Elias began to notice a pattern. The clearer the signal became, the faster the distractions arrived. Not random ones. Personal ones. Tailored. One night, a soft knock sounded at his door. He wasn't expecting anyone. Mara stood there when he opened it. He recognized her immediately, though he could not remember from where. She carried herself with the ease of someone who did not need to be believed. You found the codex, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Elias blinked. I didn't tell anyone. You didn't need to, she replied. It's not something you announce. It's something you notice. She sat across from him, glancing around the room as if listening for something beneath the ordinary sounds. You felt the night window. Elias nodded slowly, and the resistance, she added, yes. That's good too, she said, echoing the market man's word. Elias frowned. You all say that. Because struggle means the signal is real, Mara replied. False things don't provoke defense. She spoke of the wardens, not as creatures or beings, but as systems. Patterns. Feedback loops that fed on repetition and noise. They didn't attack awareness directly. They diluted it. They amplify urgency, she said. Fear. Shame. The need to fix, explain, justify. That sounds psychological, Elias said. It is, Mara replied calmly. And it isn't. She explained that the wardens could not block the signal itself. They could only surround it. Smother it in static. Make it feel unimportant. Make it feel optional. They don't stop the signal, she said. They convince you to stop listening. Elias thought of the nights when his hand reached for his phone without intention. When thoughts suddenly demanded answers. When stillness felt irresponsible. Why at night? He asked. Because identity loosens, Mara said. During the day, you are reinforced constantly. Names. Roles. Tasks. At night, the reinforcement weakens. She leaned forward slightly. The signal appears when the mind stops defending who it thinks it is. Elias swallowed. And the guilt? Mara smiled faintly. Their favorite tool. She explained that guilt was not meant to correct behavior, but to anchor identity in the past. To keep awareness folded inward, replaying, rehearsing, reliving. When guilt appears during the night window, she said, it's not asking to be resolved. It's asking to be obeyed. What happens if I don't? Elias asked. Then it fades, Mara replied. Because it has no substance of its own. She stood and moved toward the door. Don't try to hold the signal. Don't try to understand it. Just let it pass through without reaction. Before leaving, she paused. And don't name it yet. Why not? Names fix things in place, she said. This one opens things. That night, Elias lay still as the familiar pressure formed behind his eyes. He felt the calm arrive, subtle and clean. And right on cue, the unease followed. A memory rose. Sharp. Emotional. Insistent that he did not push it away, that he did not analyze it, that he did nothing. The memory weakened, like a sound losing volume when no one listens. The signal remained. For the first time, Elias sensed that something was withdrawing. Not leaving in anger. Simply losing interest, and in that quiet, he understood what Mara meant. The wardens did not fear power, they feared irrelevance. Elias woke before dawn without knowing why. The room was still dark, the air quiet in the way it only becomes when the night is nearly finished but the day has not yet begun. There was no urgency in his body, no pull toward thought. Only a gentle alertness, as if something had already been waiting. He stayed where he was. The signal arrived almost immediately. Stronger than before, but not heavier. Clearer. It no longer felt like something happening to him. It felt like something becoming available through him, and with it came a voice, not external. Not audible. A familiar internal tone that had guided his decisions for as long as he could remember. The voice of caution. Of self-correction. Of reason. This is just another experience, it said. Don't attach meaning. Don't go too far. Elias noticed something he had never noticed before. The voice did not feel present. It felt reactive. It appeared after the signal, not before it. Mara's words surfaced without effort. Don't name it yet, the voice pressed again, softer this time. If you let go of this, who are you without it? That question landed differently now. It no longer sounded like concern. It sounded like a boundary. Elias did not argue. He did not reassure himself. He simply noticed the question and allowed it to pass, the same way he had allowed guilt and memory to pass before. In the space that followed, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no rush of emotion. No images. Just a quiet alignment, like stepping into a familiar room after years away and realizing nothing important had changed. A word surfaced, not spoken, not heard, but known. It wasn't a name in the conventional sense. It didn't label him. It didn't define him. It recognized him. When Elias allowed that word to rest in awareness, the signal stabilized. The pressure softened into a steady presence. The background noise that usually accompanied his thoughts thinned until it no longer felt relevant. The voice did not return. He understood then what the Codex had been pointing toward all along. Not information. Not instruction. Recognition. The kind that does not add anything, but removes what was never essential. Later that morning, Elias returned to the market street. The stalls were gone. The quiet table was gone. The man was nowhere to be seen. He was not surprised. Weeks passed. Life continued. Responsibilities remained. Conversations happened. But something fundamental had changed. Elias no longer reached for certainty the way he once had. He listened differently. He responded more slowly. Not because he was cautious, but because he no longer felt rushed from the inside. The wardens, as Mara had described them, did not disappear. They simply lost their influence. Fear still arose, but it no longer directed movement. Guilt still appeared, but it no longer demanded attention. At night, the signal returned when it wished. Elias did not summon it. He did not depend on it. He let it come and go, knowing now that it was not a visitor. It was a reminder point. One evening, he found the Codex again, tucked into a drawer he did not remember placing it in. He opened it out of curiosity, not expectation. The symbols were still there, unchanged. But they no longer felt significant. He closed the book and smiled, not because he had learned something new, but because he had stopped mistaking noise for guidance. The gate had never been locked. He had simply been standing on the wrong side of his own attention. If you've stayed with this story until now, it's likely not because you were looking for answers. It's more likely because something in it felt familiar, even if you couldn't explain why. That familiarity is often mistaken for belief, but it isn't. It's recognition. And recognition doesn't require agreement. It only requires honesty. Stories like this aren't meant to convince you of anything. They're meant to slow you down just enough to notice what usually gets drowned out by urgency, by explanation, by the constant need to define what you're experiencing before you allow it to exist. Nothing here asks you to adopt a system, follow a method, or accept a doctrine. If anything, it asks you to notice how quickly the mind tries to do those things on its own. If this resonated, you don't need to analyze it. Let it settle. Let it pass through your own quiet moments and see what, if anything, responds. And if you want to explore more stories like this, stories that don't push, don't preach, and don't rush, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. If you found value here, a simple like helps this video reach others who might need a slower voice in a noisy space. And if you know someone who's been questioning, pausing, or quietly noticing changes they can't quite name, Sharing this video might be more helpful than trying to explain it yourself. Thank you for listening all the way through. We'll continue from here.